Hello and welcome to another episode of Rico'S Rants. I'm your host, Rico DeGiorgio. So another Rico's Rant I'm gonna do is for a movie I saw in theaters when it came out years ago. I think 2010. I want to say. Movie is called 127 Hours, and it's the infamous movie where the guy cuts off his hand. And I don't need to put a spoiler caption for this because this is at this point public knowledge. It's like, we all know the story of Aaron Ralston. He is the mountain climber who, you know, in the middle of mountain climbing, falls and a boulder, a giant rock, falls on his, pins his hand up against the rock wall, and he can't dislodge it. And over the course of 127 hours, he eventually cuts off his own hand with a really cheap, dull knife to escape and live. And he's still alive, and he still is climbing. He's still a adventure nut. So they made a movie of it, directed by Danny Boyle and starring James Franco. Now, I remember when the incident with Aaron Ralston happened, but I didn't remember it when it happened. I remember the outcome, it was just public knowledge at that point, but I had heard about it, and I thought someone had lied when these kids at school were telling me about it. I'm like, that's fucking stupid. Why would he cut off his own hand? After I read Aaron Ralston's book, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, and I saw the movie. Now, this particularly, the film itself, in particular, was very significant to me because it was the first time I left the theater speechless. And if you've seen my Rico's Rants, or if you know me personally, you know that I am very rarely ever speechless. I always have something to say. If I have nothing to say, I am in absolute shock. Or I'm sleeping. But even then, I've been known to talk in my sleep occasionally. I was so impressed with James Franco, and with the story, because they made essentially an action movie where a guy doesn't move. He's frozen. He's stuck, literally, between a rock and a hard place. And yet they somehow managed to make a captivating, suspenseful drama and ultimately an action film about a guy who just is stuck. So, quick rundown. James Franco plays Aaron Ralston. He in the beginning of the film, he sort of does an impromptu, doesn't tell anybody where he's going, goes to out in the canyons. I forget, it's somewhere in Utah. And you could tell, and he explicitly says this is like his second home. Like, he grew up going to these places. He knows, he more or less is a travel guide. And at one point, he stumbles upon these two young women who, and they sort of unnerved by him because, he's got a bandana around his mouth. He's got dark sunglasses and a hat. He looks kind of, they're out in the middle of nowhere essentially, and he's very jovial and hey, good morning, what's going on? And they're just oh god, dude, who the fuck? And he's just oh, you guys are lost, let me help you out. He gives them a quick tour, shows them this this deep pool caravan essentially. Not caravan, what's the word? A cave essentially, where he sort of takes them and slides down a rock wall, and there's a giant pool in a cave, and they sort of have a fun time swimming and having a good time, and he's filming his camera a bunch of parts of it and taking selfies essentially. Um, he doesn't have his cell phone. He doesn't, everything more or less super essential is in his car, including lots of water, lots of food, sleeping bag, all that shit. He was planning on just going for a hike and then making his way back to his car. Um, so he separates from the girls. They actually invite him to go to a party the next following night. Um, and they even say like, "Oh yeah, you'll see a giant. You'll know you're at the party when there's a giant inflatable Scooby Doo." And that's sort of a reoccurring thing. I don't know if that's. I can't remember if that's an actual thing that happened in real life, or if that was just part of the dramatization. But at some points in the film, when he's going crazy, he hallucinates and sees a Scooby Doo, um, and even hears the the Scooby laugh. It's almost like it's taunting him. So he starts making his way, slips, falls, boulder crashes against his hand, blood on the wall, and he just can't pull it out. For what we see for about 8 hours, he tries lifting the boulder off his hand, and the fucking thing is just too heavy. And so he goes through his supplies that he has, and he does it all one-handed and standing, and he can't even relax. He tries to relax, it fucks up his hand even more. In order to sleep, he eventually latches his rope, like a climbing rope, and winches it so he can sort of hang and sleep up against the boulder. It's absolutely astounding what Aaron Ralston went through. And so he uses his knife, starts trying to chip away at the boulder, separating from his hand. And he does this for hours, if not 2 days, I think he does it. And he slowly goes through his water. Like he takes like a sip of water every hour. And then eventually he has like one microwavable burrito and he eats that. And he tries to salvage whatever he can. And he really doesn't have a whole lot. He's got a flashlight that he can put over his visor. He's got his watch, which he uses to time 12-hour intervals to see how long it's taking him. He goes through his water. He goes through his food. He eventually drinks his own urine. And that was a hard scene. And he's got this cheap knife, a multi-tool knife, and the actual blade itself, the big blade, is dull, and he's been using it to chip away at the boulder. And the boulder, as he realizes, as he's chipping away, all the weight is actually he's making it fall on his hand even more. The more he chips away, the more weight is gradually going on his hand. He's had no circulation on his hand. It's turning blue and gray. And so that hand's basically dead at this point. So no matter what, he can't even save his hand. So he starts experimenting with trying to cut through it with the dull blade through his hand. His wrist specifically, and it just won't even do anything. It just won't make any even shallow cuts. At one point, in a hallucination and rage moment, he stabs his wrist and feels bone, and then he just sort of realizes, I can't even cut through this because I'll have to eventually get to the bone, so I'll have to break the bone. Now, yes, it shows a very graphic hand cutting scene, but it's not in the same way of like Saw or Hostel or those horror torture porn movies. This is very graphic, but you're kind of rooting him on. This is the only way he will survive. And we know this going into it. We know the outcome. If you know even just the tiniest bit of what happens, you know he's going to cut his fucking hand off. And you can't take your fucking eyes off it. And I mean, I'm a horror movie nut, and gore doesn't really bother me. I was like the entire time because it looks realistic. It doesn't look fake. It actually looks very realistic. And even so much so that like he, in order to break his wrist, he actually like uses leverage and just snaps the bone, and he sort of just like he actually goes, ah, yes, like it's a triumph. He uses little things like that as, yeah, did that. He looks for the smallest things as blessings, and he's our only person that we are talking to, or that he's talking to us primarily because he's talking to the camera. And I did read that this was actually the same video camera that Aaron Ralston used. So, and when Danny Boyle and James Franco were making the movie, they were allowed to actually see all the footage that Aaron had filmed, and he had not released it to the public. Only close personal friends and family members have seen it, and the tape itself is actually locked up in a bank vault. But he allowed them to see it to get it as realistic as possible. So what we see is probably 90 to 99% accurate, especially since Aaron Ralston himself is in the film and added creative input. And I think he actually objected to one scene in particular, which was, Aaron one night decided to masturbate, and he is going over like the old footage of him with the two girls. Like I think her names are Christy and Megan. Krista and Megan. That sounds right. And at one point, because they're all bathing, they're swimming and they're in their bathing suits, they have cleavage, and he at one point sort of pauses it and tries masturbating, and it's just not working out for him. So he can't even get the satisfaction of having an orgasm before he dies. I think the real Aaron Ralston sort of objected to that scene, like saying, I didn't do that, and I wouldn't have done that, but whatever. So the part where he gets, throughout the film, it changes. He's going through very different emotions where he just writes his will on this video camera, essentially, writes on a rock the dates that he assumed he'll die. Says a loving goodbye to his family, acknowledges that he was wrong to have not answered the phone when they were calling him, did not tell anybody what he was doing. Even his bosses at work don't know where the fuck he is, and they will only send out a search party about 3 or 4 days after he's presumed dead. And at that point, he's out in the middle of nowhere. So he finally has the epiphany, like, today is the day I'm going to cut my hand off, and he fucking does. And he stumbles back, and he just stares at it, takes one more photo of a very now bloody sight. He's got blood smeared on his arm, on his face. He wraps up his stump and takes his climbing rope, starts hiking. So now, even though he's free, he's not done. Now he's got to just still find help out in the middle of nowhere with blood loss and a missing hand now, and he's drastically dehydrated, and he is underfed, and he's just malnourished and everything. I mean, he is on death's door at this point, and he still manages to hike, and he actually manages to grapple down like a 20-foot rock wall to get to a main trail. And eventually he sees a family hiking, calls out to them. They run towards him, give him water, and the helicopter comes and lands him and saves him. And then it shows a little quick montage of the after effects of reporters taking photos of him and everything, and him all of a sudden having this celebrity life. And then from then on, meeting his current wife and having a family and starting a family. And it shows the real Aaron Ralston sitting on a couch with his family, sort of like looking at James Franco and smiling. Like I viewed it as him saying like, "You did good. You did a good job representing who I am and what I went through." So James Franco as an actor is an actor that I both love and despise, because when he's doing his comedies and his sort of quirky roles, he comes off very much like a douchebag, and it's getting very, very, very tiring. But he also throws me these great movies where I'm just like, fuck, James Franco was great. Like he played James Dean in a TNT movie, and he not only looks just like James Dean, but he captures the same emotion, the same range. And I was Florida, and like I said, like I very much have like, oh man, James Dean's one of my favorite actors, and then James Dean's one of the fucking worst fucking actors ever. So he can act. He just sort of does this douchey thing in a lot of his movies. But for 127 hours, I was floored. I was absolutely amazed when I first saw it. And they put a lot of filler in. There's a lot of montages of him being lost, and he comes to the conclusion in the film that this boulder has been waiting for him his whole life, that he was destined for this moment to change who he is as a person. Blah blah blah. This was eventually going to happen, no matter what. And it's a beautiful film. Danny Boyle did a fantastic job. James Franco did a fantastic job. So easily I would give it 4 stars. Not 5 stars, because after rewatching it, there are some slow scenes. There's a lot of scenes focusing on a past love, like how he just wasn't emotionally available for her, how he took her for granted, and you just don't care. It's sort of like you are more focused on and wanting to know the story of how he gets the fuck out of this situation. And they put a lot of too much emphasis on the build-up of what happened years ago, out of context, into as these fillers, and we don't really need it. And first time I saw it, I was impressed. Second time, I was like, I'm not impressed anymore. I'm kind of bored. Let's skip ahead to like him going crazy on camera. But I will rewatch it again. I, in fact, bought the movie. I loved it that much. So if you haven't seen 127 Hours, go see it. All right, guys. Take care. Love you all to death. Bye.